I've just finished reading Victor Repert's C.S. Lewis's Dangerous Idea in defense of the argument from reason, and it was well worth the cost of the book. Indeed, the book is a steal. You can get it for under $5. As one of the blurbs on the back of the book indicates, the aim of the book is twofold: to defend C.S. Lewis and his argument from reason. C. Stephen Evans writes, Victor Repert's book is a delight on two counts. First, it is a sophisticated and well-informed discussion of C.S. Lewis and his apologetic arguments, demolishing some well-known myths and demonstrating that Lewis had important and serious things to say as a philosopher. This task is done primarily in the first chapter and finished in the second. The second task, refining Lewis's argument, takes up the remaining 4 chapters and is for me the most important part of the book. Repert defends C.S. Lewis by debunking several claims that have tarnished his reputation as a serious thinker. One such claim is that G.E.M. Anscombe demolished Lewis's argument from reason, full stop, as opposed to merely criticizing it, and caused him to retreat from apologetics. He comments that Lewis revised his argument and even received commendation from Anscombe because of that, and, interestingly, agreement from Peter Geach, Anscombe's husband, who makes a similar argument to Lewis's. He also explodes the notion that Lewis quit apologetics because of his debate with Anscombe, or that to cope with the death of his wife, he had to retreat to Ochimistic fideism. We have to know or accept the truth of Christianity merely on faith and recognize that God is unknowable due to our fallenness, and hence, so is why his permitting of suffering is good. He easily dispatches these claims, noting that the thoughts Lewis expresses in, for instance, A Grief Observed, are in keeping with his anti-theistic and anti-Occamist arguments of his earlier career. He also exposes the double standard at work by those who allege Lewis cannot be taken seriously because he asserts and argues for his positions with confidence, and at times seems to regard non-believers as intellectual buffoons. The Christian apologist and Christian agnostic, says Repert, and I think, by the way, a term such as Christian skeptic is better, these exist in Lewis throughout his career. Repert says, hence, Lewis often regards non-believers as intellectually serious, even if many of them aren't, which is not to say most of them aren't, and even if not all of them are, or even those who are consistent, or rather, all those who are intelligent aren't necessarily consistent when it comes to applying their positions. Just because Lewis points these out and doesn't hold back, as it were, doesn't mean he's strawmanning their positions or reaching for low-hanging fruit. The important thing to note from this part of the book is that Lewis himself ought not to be taken as giving the final formulation of the argument, but as providing later apologists and philosophers valuable insights on which to build. Repert writes, Lewis can either be offered as a final answer or be offered as a spur to think the relevant issues through oneself. The way one honors Lewis' apologetic achievement, it seems to me, is not simply by repeating what he says, but by developing his ideas, asking probing questions of them, and developing the discussion in ways that reflect one's own thinking as well as Lewis's. The more interesting task of the book, in my opinion, is where he actually gives the argument from reason, which takes up the latter 2/3 of the book. In Chapter 3, he shows that Lewis's argument escapes from and can be improved by the criticism leveled against it by G.E.M. Anscombe. Importantly, he argues that Lewis's argument is right to argue that as long as naturalism reduces all things to anything but rational causes, either irrational or non-rational, it cannot explain our ability to engage in rational inference. And moreover, he argues that, contrary to Anscombe, the content of our thoughts play a causal role in the production of other thoughts or mental states, which therefore puts it in conflict or competition with naturalism because of its tendency to totalize physical explanations. In the 4th chapter, he gives several variants of the argument from reason. They all have the same basic structure. X is required for us to make rational inferences. X is incompatible with naturalism, hence we have to reject belief in naturalism. He argues that the intentionality of our thoughts, their aboutness, that is to say, their adherence to logical laws, their ability to cause further thoughts in virtue of their content, and our ability to form reliable beliefs about non-apparent features of reality, cannot obtain given naturalism. In the 5th chapter, he clarifies what he means by explanatory dualism. Hint, it is not simply Cartesian dualism, even if that would be one kind of explanatory dualism, as far as Repert is concerned. The idea is that we must explain at least some things. For example, our ability to make rational inferences in terms of reason at the most fundamental level, even if physical explanations are also relevant. The latter, however, cannot be exhaustive. Because of this, he says a naturalist can't appeal to, say, Kripke's theory of reference, as it applies only to how reference is transferred, but not how it comes to be, at least not in a non-intentional way. Or any reductive theory of mind, including the sorts of property dualism where mental states have whatever causal power they do solely in virtue of their physical properties and not their mental content. So epiphenomenalism, among other things. I'm inclined to agree with him in this analysis. In the 6th chapter, he addresses the inadequacy objection, to the effect that, 1, a fully complete naturalistic account of the world will eventually explain the features Reppert appeals to. He calls this promissory naturalism. And 2, to explain these features in non-naturalistic terms doesn't explain anything. He argues against the first part of this objection that he has shown that naturalism cannot explain these features, but only explain them away, and that the notion of explanation, operative in the second part of the objection, would have to say the notion of objection that such naturalists are looking for an explanatorily dualist account is too restrictive, and that the idea of explanations that non-naturalists, which for the purpose of this book are theists, idealists, and pantheists, can give are informative, even if they bottom out by appealing to the nature of this or that. As long as naturalism requires us to explain everything in terms reducible to a non-teleological level, where all that is at play, or all that is physical, it cannot explain mind. And positing an irreducibly non-physical aspect of reality, either a Cartesian soul or inbuilt dispositions of matter that emerge eventually to produce an immaterial mind, per Hasker, or appealing to God to explain the emergence of mind, does give some light into the nature of the mind. And it is not as if naturalists can avoid explaining their theory and things at the most fundamental level of reality, except by noting that they have the features they do because it is in their nature to have them. You can't have an explanatory regress that goes on forever. I want to add that even if much of our knowledge of God or the soul is negative, not this, not that, and so forth, it is still informative and presupposes some positive knowledge. For example, the soul is immaterial because it is irreducibly teleological would be an example of a claim of this sort. When I have time, I will go through his book more closely, trying to discern what I regard as the most important claims within it. Keep in mind, this is but the beginning of my writing, or in this case, recording on the argument from reason, which will hopefully end in me giving my own argument for it after I've examined much more sources than this.